Hello, if everyone could find their seats, we're going to begin in just a second. Well, that was fast. This is a very disciplined crowd. I'm impressed. Good morning. I am Holly Light, Executive Director of Madison Square Park Conservancy. And on behalf of our staff and Board of Trustees, I'd like to welcome everyone to our 2023 Annual Symposium on Public Art. This year's program, Transforming Public Art, promises a thought-provoking half-day exploring how artists are bringing new ideas, context, and materials to civic and green spaces. And the QR code here on the screen can give you access to the full agenda of the day. Before we dive in, I'd like to take a minute to recognize that every public site has a long and likely complicated history. We often tout that Madison Square Park has been public land since 1686, but of course, its actual history as public land far predates that. In 2020, MSPC staff met with Joe Baker, who's a member of the Delaware tribe and the co-founder and director of the Lenape Center in New York, to research and build a living land acknowledgement for our 6.2-acre park. And I'd like to share that acknowledgement with you now. Madison Square Park is located on Lenape-Hoking, the ancestral homeland of the Lenape Delaware people. We recognize that this land was forcibly taken, resulting in the displacement and genocide of the Lenape Delaware Nation. Madison Square Park Conservancy respectfully acknowledges the Lenape Delaware people, past, present, and future, who continue to live and work and connect to this land. The Conservancy honors the Lenape Delaware people, the original stewards of this land, through our commitment to a series of sustainability and restoration initiatives, including reducing our carbon imprint, promoting sustainable land management, and reintroducing species of fauna and flora indigenous to the Lenape-Hoking. I hope you all have a chance to visit the park if you haven't already. Madison Square Park Conservancy is the proud steward of this special place, raising 100% of the funds to operate and program the park, including its renowned art program. And now I'm happy to introduce our trustee, Sarah Stein-Sapir, founder of the MSPC Art Council and an ardent supporter of our art program.
Thank you, Holly. Good morning. It's a great pleasure for me to see so many people here for Madison Square Park Conservancy's annual symposium. Since 2015, during this yearly gathering, we have sparked dialogue around critical issues in contemporary art, public art, and civic space. Our past symposia have reckoned with themes surrounding presenting and commissioning public art, accessibility by neighbors and communities, the dynamism that artists bring to the public realm, contested historic monuments, the impact of climate change, and how public art has a unique role and responsibility to present these conversations. This year, the Conservancy welcomes all of you to Transforming Public Art, inspired by our current exhibition, Shahzia Sikander's Havah, To Breathe, Air, Life, and our forthcoming project with artist Sheila Pepe, My Neighbor's Garden. On behalf of my colleagues on the Conservancy's board, our art committee and art council, and the staff who tend and steward the 6.2-acre park, and on behalf of the artists whose works we have commissioned, thank you for attending today. And now, please welcome Kendall Henry, Assistant Commissioner, Public Art, New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and a member of our art committee.
Good morning, everyone. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Kendall Henry. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Public Art at the Department of Cultural Affairs. And I bring greetings from our Commissioner, Lori Cumbo. I was telling someone just now, I look forward to this symposium every year, as it's one of the very few opportunities for us as practitioners to come together. We get to discuss the latest trends, ways public art engages difficult topics, issues, celebrate our latest projects, assess implications of the work we do, and of course complain about controversies and misinterpretations of said projects. But mostly we celebrate. I'm delighted to see so many vibrant folks gathered here and look forward to the presentations and the panel discussions. We all know that it does take a village to do the work that we do, and it's important to acknowledge the individuals who drive this transformative movement. Our artists and at our so if I may, let's take a moment. I want to take a moment and applaud you for the work that you've been doing. This is very, very important for the city, and we really appreciate it. Now, speaking of remarkable individuals, I have the pleasure of introducing brilliant, I emphasize brilliant, curator behind the arts and the projects and the thought-provoking programs that we have today. A visionary curation has brought together an exceptional lineup of speakers and panelists who will tackle vital questions and challenges to traditional notions of conventions and public art practice. Please put your hands together and welcome my friend, artistic director, and Martin Freeman chief curator, Brooke.
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Kendall, for all you do for New York City, for artists, and for Madison Square Park Conservancy. Welcome to our annual symposium on public art. We are honored and thrilled that so many artists, colleagues, neighbors, students, workers, supporters, and friends have joined together today. Our thanks to our partners at SVA Theater, Adam Natale, Rebecca Schwartz, and Vincent Burek, and Brian Sierra, who welcome us to this auditorium each year. And thank you to our colleagues at Madison Square Park Conservancy, Ian Devaney, Emily Dickinson, Ya Jeffries, Ayana Milligan, Tasha Naula, Amelia Rogers, who are engaged here today. And a big shout out to Truth Mary Cole, Senior Curatorial Manager, for her efforts on today's symposium, and to Tom Reedy, who worked so intensely and thoughtfully on our art program. Transforming public art is made possible by a generous grant from the Henry Luce Foundation. Thank you to Mariko Silver, President and CEO, and Dr. Terry Carbone, Program Director for American Art. Early in the launch of conceiving an annual symposium, the Luce Foundation gave us a green light. They endorsed the need for dialogue and scholarship in the public art field through breakout speakers around pressing subjects. We are so grateful to them. Today's symposium gathers extraordinary participants who have each advanced works, art, scholarship, and civic impact, or curatorial practice around the transformation of ideas and the use of materials outdoors in public space. And I can't imagine beginning this morning without recognizing the context for this convening. Our role as curators, writers, supporters, neighbors, collectors, patrons, workers, students, our essential power for humanity is to uphold the continued conversation by artists, some of whom use the availability of civic space for collective and private reckoning, public debate, contemplation, and exuberance. Let's look back just 6 years to 2017, when New York City convened the Mayoral Advisory Commission on City Art, Monuments, and Markers. Tom Finkelpearl, one of today's speakers, was then Commissioner of Cultural Affairs and co-chaired that advisory group with the Ford Foundation's Darren Walker. Shahzia Sikander, whose project Havah, To Breathe Air Life, is on view through Sunday, was a commission member. This was a moment when, amongst other things, Sikander confirmed the dearth of representations of women in public sculpture across New York City and the United States. According to the 2021 National Monument Audit produced by the Monument Lab and funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, of the 50 individuals most frequently represented in monuments in this country, just 6% represent women. And it's unclear what percentage of those monuments are by women artists. Sikander's response 6 years later was to lift a female figure onto a prominent New York City building. With the endorsement of the court's justices, she transformed and invigorated the historic visual program on the rooftop of architect James Brown Lord's Appellate Division Courthouse dating to 1900, right across the street from Madison Square Park. Sikander placed a luminous 8-foot-high bronze titled Now in the lineup of Confucius, Moses, Zoroaster, Justinian, and other historic male lawgivers by male sculptors. Sikander raised issues of women and justice. And thrillingly, Now and her counterpart Witness, on view in Madison Square Park, don't depict one individual, but are allegories for viewers and especially women to find a place for themselves in the work. Sikander assessed what was on the street in public space and used it as a catalyst in her practice to not only push her paintings and drawings into 3 dimensions, but to impact who has historically been represented and how a sculpture outdoors in civic space can thrive. Sikander found inspiration and urgency from the need for equality of representation. And when she interrogated and destabilized the series of male figures in stone on the courthouse, artist Sheila Pepe investigates new materials and concepts in public space. Pepe is unexpectedly confirming an urgency through crochet. For decades, she's worked to overturn hoary assumptions for crochet as stale, airless work, making granny squares. Instead, Sheila Pepe uses the material as an agent of activism by responding to collective gatherings, gender, identity, and access as part of her long-term studio practice. Pepe's work questions indoor space as literally and symbolically closing the door of potential to women. And later this month, in My Neighbor's Garden, opening on June 26th in Madison Square Park, she considers public space to create physical positions that welcome all parkgoers through a fabricated city garden. Pepe has taken the materials she used in past indoor exhibitions in the hallowed spaces of museums and transformed them for an urban public park. Her stitches have grown for the outdoors. Her crochet hooks are larger and her materials have a durability for weather. Pepe radicalized the kindly constitution of crochet into a paradigm of feminist action, drawing on histories of women who convened in sewing circles. These forums were historically spaces to discuss human rights and women's rights, to advocate for and propel the abolition of slavery, and to create garments or blanketing for sale to provide income. Late 19th and early 20th century photographers documented such circles where Black, Native American, Asian, and white people across generations participated. More recently, resettled refugees to the United States have joined sewing circles in their communities. Pepe convened groups of novice and expert crocheters, queer crocheters, some who crochet for their livelihoods in her Brooklyn studio, to collectively create this project, a practice that's a natural extension of her decades of teaching at many institutions, including Bard, the New School, Mass Art, Pratt, RISD, Smith, BCU, Williams, and this winter at Dartmouth. Pepe has taken crushing times for women and for queer people and is creating an exultant sculpture through materials and with communities to transform what sculpture can be. Public art can carry stunning inspiration and take on dialogue. It's out in full view, not physically harbored by the institution. Artists who work outdoors often bring forth great work of nuance from the deepest spaces that reflect human consciousness. This is what our speakers will consider this morning. So why work with a vision towards ongoing transformation? Because it's a way to shape and to form an optimistic and open future. We are thrilled to open our symposium this morning with a conversation between Sheila Pepe and Jenny Goldstein, Jennifer Rubio, Associate Curator of the Collection at the Whitney Museum. Following their dialogue, our panel discussion includes artists who work textile materials. Zenobia Bailey, who is based in Philadelphia and may be best known to New Yorkers for her MTA Arts and Design Commission, the number 7 subway line at 34th Street, Hudson Yards, and for her colorful textile work. Zoe Buckman, a Brooklyn-based multidisciplinary artist born in the UK, whose practice includes embroidery and who focuses on themes of feminism and women. Ana Maria Hernando, born in Argentina and living in Boulder, Colorado, whose vibrant, vital work includes materials linked to women's practices. And Gilbert Vicario, Chief Curator of the Perez Art Museum, Miami. The panel is moderated by Legacy Russell, Executive Director and Chief Curator of the Kitchen. Following the panel, our keynote conversation, our next keynote is with Shahzia Sikander, Tom Finkelpearl, social practice teaching scholar in residence at CUNY. And next, there will be a short talk by Karen Lemmy, the Lucy S. Rame Curator of Sculpture at the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C., whose exhibition, The Shape of Power, Stories of Race and American Sculpture, opens next year. And our program concludes with Joy, a performance by the musician Gregorio Uribe, the Colombian singer and accordionist. It was Sheila Pepe who suggested the accordion, and our friends at Carnegie Hall, Nolan Robertson, introduced us to Gregorio. We are so grateful to these exceptional participants, and thank you all for coming this morning. It's a pleasure to welcome Sheila Pepe and Jenny Gold. Thank you.
They're coming down. Does everyone hear us?
Hello,
I'm Jenny.
I'm Sheila.
For coming. We want to put a
Yeah. Who's driving? Am I driving?
drive.
Okay. Need a rear view mirror.
Yeah.
I'll just click through.
This shows art says. We'll stop and talk about this.
Well, I'm not going to talk. I think
Okay.
I'm just going to click through.
Okay.
Because I can't see anything. I'll just click and click
Okay.
and click.
And then we'll come back.
And then
The idea.
let's do the idea.
Okay.
Ask.
Okay. Well, we have some prompts for our discussion today.
Yeah.
And I loved Brooke's introduction because she really gave such a great overview of the project to come. We're in a kind of interesting spot of talking about this project that's yet to happen, that's yet to go on view in the park. But we can talk about some of the ideas and some of what got you here. I love thinking about crochet with your work because so many different ideas loop and swirl and twist around in your work.
Yeah.
And the process of crochet encapsulates so much of that. It's literally flowing through.
It sounds like my brain
Yes, exactly. So
and my fingers.
we wanted to talk about what it means to you to bring crochet, this material that's so central to your thinking and being, out into this kind of civic space. We wanted to talk about the vulnerability of that, the materials. Brooke talked a little bit about how you've grappled with that. But also what that means for you as an artist, and not just the vulnerabilities, what are the possibilities?
That's right.
Because we love to be optimistic.
Generally optimistic. Yeah. I can't help it. It's just one of those things.
Yeah.
So, I'm not the first person to bring crocheting outside. There are yarn bombers around probably the world, other artists that have brought crocheting outside and fabric outside. I think, to my youth and the monumentality of the first, wrapped building or wall of, the running wall of Cristo. And that kind of monumentality is well beyond what I'm going to attempt here. But so I'm standing on some precedent. Excuse me, for my practice, it means leaving the comfort of the man behind, meaning leaving the comfort of the four walls, the white cube of the institution that I've, throughout my career, mostly have identified with patriarchal order. And, in the beginning it was infiltrating, and then after a while it was a kind of collaboration where the program needed to change, meaning in an architectural sense, the meaning of and the use of the crocheted environment had to change. And throughout that, more people got involved, and it was a site for conversation or deconstruction, dismantling. So the crocheting has always been a sign of women's work, right? Something done in a domestic space, made big for an institutional space. This is the first time going outside, mostly because I look around myself in the city and in the countryside and say, wow, who would want to mess with that? Like, it's very daunting, but thrilling to bring all this stuff outside. One of the interesting things about a lot of my earlier work is that they were all designed to be, can you click while I talk?
Well, the one is up now.
Okay.
Oh. How do we stop it?
I don't know. Good?
I think it's just playing, but let's see what happens.
Good. Is that they were designed to be cut out of spaces, shipped back in parts as part of this economy, and then reused as a kind of sourdough for a next piece. So here we have a different situation. I am tangling with the environment. You know, I'm setting this tent-like structure inside of a lot of trees and city and gorgeousness that I hope to slightly compete with, right? But this idea of bringing materials out there that are not, they'll stay. They're, you know, it's like your shoelaces are meant to get rained on and then dry. Paracord is meant to be outside, rope and things that are ponchos. But it will change, I hope. It will change physically, and everything in my work, physical, is also metaphoric. So in December, maybe it'll be lighter than, you know, hot pink. Maybe there'll be some phrase. Maybe a couple of squirrels have their way with it. I don't know. But that is truly exciting to me, and the kind of metaphor about publicness that seems real to me, that just seems seasonal to me. And future venues invite a performance of repair, for example, or a new conversation about what that object has become. And I think there needs to be a place in public art for things that are intended to be real and physical and handmade, and also ephemeral. So, I mean, that's both the risk and the opportunity all in one.
Can you say a little bit more? I want to get. Oh, no. Forgive me, everyone. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you say a little bit more? I'm going slightly off script.
Good.
Because you started answering the publicness, but we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Will you say a little bit more about what garden means to you and the inspiration of gardens? Because this is a park, and sometimes we use these words sort of interchangeably, but I do think that they have slightly different valences for you in this project, and I'd love for you to speak to that.
Well, when I look at that park, I see a lot of people using it like their garden. Like, it's a city, so if you live in a small cube, you have to go somewhere. This is a wonderful thing about New York. You know, when we lived in the East Village, at midnight on a really hot night, there were kids playing soccer in Tompkins Square Park. So it is your porch.
Right.
More porch in Tompkins Square Park than garden, I think, at the time. But, or backyard. Here, the planting is incredible. The trees are, like, the care and sophistication of this place. I do want to call it a garden first and then a park. And for that reason, you know, I needed to connect to the program of the park, to the architecture of the park. And so I've been able to collaborate with, or ask for the collaboration of the horticulturalists at the garden, at the park, to design plants that will grow up and meet, hopefully, the crocheting, so that it becomes part and parcel of the whole of the creative act in that space. my neighbor's garden is, we've been in Bay Ridge for a couple of years now, and there are a lot of gardens. And some of them are here, and some of them aren't really gardens. They're public space where things grow up. There are a lot of literal gardens, but they all kind of defy the location. It's when you look really carefully, it looks like a wheat field, and then you realize, oh yeah, it's just the weird triangle in the middle that nobody planted. One of my favorites is the tree that's been cut down, and you can see the whole story. That's one of the reading materials 101. What happened? The tree was blown over, and then they had to cut it down, and the whole grid, the metal came up, and that's a very powerful image, and it's one of powerful change, which I feel like I hope I'm tapping into these kinds of things. So, garden is also like, my neighbor's garden is also like at the studios where we are. It's my next door neighbor's art. Like I have a new neighbor, they're musicians, and even though they've made it very soundproof, I can hear them. So their garden is filled with music. It's just, everything's a metaphor. We're artists, that's how we do, you know?
So these images that you brought are all from your neighborhood?
Yeah, some might be a little bit towards Park Slope.
Okay.
I take a lot of pictures.
The
I have
pictures
so
you
many
take
more.
in your neighborhood, or maybe walking to your studio around Brooklyn.
Yeah, Sunset Park.
And seeing flowers or weeds or a kind of accidental garden.
Yeah.
And then pulling some of that inspiration.
Yeah, this idea that things, being there, I see things growing that I saw growing in Jersey when I was a kid. So knowing that I'm on the same Lenape land that in this small tract of woods in, my suburban neighborhood, that's very consoling. It's like being able to order a regular coffee and people know what that is. Which is what I experienced when I moved back from Massachusetts. I was like, I want a buttered roll and a regular coffee. And you know what that is. It's remarkable. It's my culture. So, yeah, I think things growing, it's remarkable to have here. And unlike my years in Western Mass when we literally did grow gardens, I'm much more invested in our urban lives together now, I think, and the difference we share. So, and I don't remember your original question, but...
No, I just wanted you to talk about the gardens in your neighborhood and the way that they helped
Yeah.
inspire this project.
Definitely. And when I went to the park, it was an opportunity to reference, again, something that's domestic, that's home. And knowing that there were people in that park who treated it like their neighborhood garden, and that neighborhood has changed quite a bit. And, I can tell some of the people are workers in the area, and they're treating it like their garden, which is great. So, there's a place where there's a place in this work and in my mind where the domestic is public, and the domestic is given weight in a public space. And the difference of those domestic spaces need to shine in our public spaces, right? The difference is that we bring the unseen labor of mostly women, in my mind, only because it's a few thousand years and we're still working on it. But there are plenty of men who do unseen labor. And just now, labor it's been always so important to me. And it seems now that labor is on the back foot. I don't feel like people like to work hard anymore. There's no joy in working hard. I just do. Everyone, well, it'll be easier if I do that. It's like, who cares if it'll be easier? Will it be as interesting? Will you have pride in that labor? Or do you even consider having pride in labor? This is very important to me. It's part of my family legacy that it's the only thing that tracks is this thing about labor that you have pride in. And I think that's why I like making things. And I know that's why people garden, because why
Right.
else would you garden
For
except
something that won't
for-
last.
Yeah. You know, you've got your perennials, but all those people in my neighborhood who are chock full of annuals, I'm like, whoa, that's God's work. That's crazy. You know what I mean? It's that's a lot of labor for a short run.
Yeah.
That's me. Yeah.
Right. Well, I feel like you started to get at this topic that seems so essential to the project of today, which is talking about the relationship of publicness and public art. And if I'm hearing you right, and you can tell me if I'm
No, yeah.
right or wrong, is that some of this has to do with accepting degradation,
Yeah.
disrepair, the squirrels, whatever may happen,
Yeah.
the kind of transitory nature of what you do. And that's why tying it or feeling that strong connection to a garden
There's
feels so relevant.
Yes, time is time space. It's always been important to me to notice that something can be purely physical, handmade, very conceptual, and performative all at once. Right. So I'm marrying, as a young artist, I was marrying all the different tribes of art making that had problems with each other. And abstraction, representation. You know, it's like, can't we just all be different and, in the word of a wise man in L.A., get along? So, yeah, there are all these art things that happen when one transforms a domestic activity into something for a bigger audience. And in an inside space, in a gallery or museum or something like that, you have very particular kinds of limits with an expectation that it will be public. And that this work has been built over years to be kind of, I'll say the word populist, sorry, just in the terms of like everybody kind of having a gate into the work, but then having these kind of rings of nerdiness that are about all this like art relationships,
Right.
relationships within the art world and within art making. So literally bringing the thing outside means that I have an opportunity for that big tent that figuratively, that I'm hoping for, and having in this location specifically, because it is an art location, having all those things meet, it's just like mind-blowingly great. I've stood under countless horses with men on them, knowing that that is most of the history of sculpture. It's only been 100 years since, maybe a little more, 150 years since this thing we call sculpture is what we recognize as sculpture. You know, what will I make of, like a carny tent? I don't know, it wouldn't have fit into sculpture maybe even a year ago. And that's exciting to me. But it's like, it's a feminist gesture and it's a human gesture in that change takes time and repetition, like all good work. How many times do you clean your kitchen? Every day. Every other day? Yeah, once a month. I don't know what you do. But eventually, somebody cleans that kitchen because that kind of work must be repeated and sustained. And so, in my mind, sustainability is most important, first and foremost, in the mind, in the epistemology, and how you think about what we do with each other, for each other. And so an opportunity to bring that outside is very meaningful to me, but to do it in a way that says, yeah, and it's going to go away. And everything goes away in this part, but it'll go away in when you look at it new, you'll be able to look at it and say, oh, that's going to go away.
Right. You will see it, and there's no mistaking that it's temporary.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, even if it moves somewhere else, it'll be changed.
Right.
And that kind of embodied change is thrilling to me. Yeah. It's what I yearn for in my own life, right? Constant learning, constant change, good change. So.
And how does that connect to the kind of communal or community spirit that I also see in this project? Not only the way you're collaborating with the horticulturalists at the park, who are going to be bringing their expertise about indigenous plants and vines, but literally the making of the crochet itself.
It's scaling up its size. I could produce this by myself. It would take a long time, but it couldn't produce this by myself, given all the other things that needed to be done this year. And it's changed me. I mean, the whole thing is quite provocative for me as a maker. I bring almost the exact same thing I've been making for a long time that's had to change to provide for new programs. So almost like the art itself doesn't matter after a certain point, right? Because you know what to do when you're working by yourself, and you can bring that to any venue and have a conversation as if this conversation is the first time happening here, which is the kind of teaching, right? But in this condition, I had to learn a lot of new things about not killing people and protecting the trees and putting a crew together. I mean, if it weren't for Truth's ability to get electronic, homegrown crocheters together, I don't know what I would have done. It's just I'm not used to hiring a lot of people. It's not been in my part of my studio practice, but it's been thrilling and challenging, and I'm not very productive when people are around. So I have to accept that, like, you're productive today, I'll be productive tomorrow. And there are all these challenges to my own practice that are equally thrilling. It's quite amazing.
Wait, can you say more about what Truth did, bringing all these folks together? Because people here might not know that having a crochet circle isn't what you might normally do.
I don't normally have a crochet circle of any kind. I've had students that have, the Truth, the park, and the funders have made it possible to gather and pay people to crochet for me. And Truth created this call with posters and electronic things and QR codes and I don't know, and brought all these people together. Then they arrived at my studio, and bless Art Built, the people at Art Built let us use this big place to come together. And the pictures you see are people working there, and we did it for 4 weeks. And then from there we picked some, what I call the ringers, the people who really know how to crochet, and they've been on a crew of repeated home crocheters, and they do piecework at home. It's almost like the 19th century. And another, I have like the Power Queer group that are some of my former students who I know crochet. I was really wanting to find crocheters that weren't art students. It was just, and I found them. And then I have my crocheters that are artists. And so we, the queer group is it's really fun. It's a lot more gossipy than the other more heterogeneous group. And we make stuff together and accumulate stuff. And having that many people now in my studio is slightly alarming, but fun now. Like, I get it. I get why you would do this. The motivation to go outside is why I would have more people in. I never wanted to run a factory, but I will now. Like, maybe, a small one. I want one deli size, because that's where I grew up. Just a mom and pop style factory, And the other thing about this group that I love is that my tolerances on what exactly you crochet is not very crochet friendly. Like, I'll give you a length and a kind of stitch. That's also mutable. I don't know, if you forget that stitch, you could do another. And width and a thickness and and I hand you a color or colors. And that's it. And Some folks want more. I'm like, oh, just make it up. So I like the mistakes and when I'm doing it. So for them, so it's a really loose group. I don't feel like I've given you the parameters. As long as it holds together, it's fine. And it's a way more fun way to work than having to check every stitch. That would make me crazy. I can't even do that for myself. So
Right, I was going to say.
yeah. So this kind of work environment feels good to me. People have some degree of autonomy. If they're upset, they'll let me know, I'm sure. We laugh a lot. You know I like to laugh.
I do. And so I wonder if a legacy of this experience is
Yes.
the deli. Like would
Yes.
having
Oh.
having an openness, a new openness in your practice that you might collaborate.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's so much that comes from the deli. It's where I learned how to meet the world, how the domestic became public. There's so many metaphors that are pulled and practices pulled out of there. You know, when you grow up wanting to be an artist and thinking you don't really know what that looks like. You see other people, and then when you get older, you get to meet other people and try to train your practice after them, and then you realize, oh, I can't do that like that. And so you're using resources you've been taught as a non-artist, maybe from people who are afraid for you to be an artist because they don't really know what that is either. So, you know, all of it comes from that place. And it took me a while to accept that as a young artist because I wanted my roots to be so much more intellectual than that. And I have plenty of intellectual and art precedents and mentors. But I think when I was young, I realized, well, actually that is everything I don't know, it's like that guy, everything I did or whatever I learned in kindergarten, it's the deli is, and other work experiences. I've had a lot of different work experiences. It's one of the best things. The years that I wasn't interested in art, I recommend it to every artist. Take 10 years out and don't do anything, except for real jobs. I'm a big advocate for real jobs.
Non-art making jobs.
Yeah, well, they could be artful. You know, roofing is a great job. You learn a lot about gravity and.
I feel everything you mention, I see in this project, which is probably purposeful.
Yeah.
But
I've been working on that.
When we first met, I thought, how do all these references and experiences come together? All of these points of identity, all these moments of your past, your deep fascination and connection to your parents and grandparents and your childhood and time spent living in rural locations and all these jobs, all these things that you mention.
Yeah.
They're all so fascinating in and of themselves, and yet somehow, to me, the garden becomes the perfect sort of metaphor and sort of literal extension of that idea of all of these seeds that turn into forms that grow and
Not
flowers.
to be too punny about it, but I'm planting it all right there in that garden.
Right. But I think it's
is-
okay to be punny.
Okay. But I want to say that I am of a generation where I was taught what it was meant to be an artist was from a lecture that Ben Shahn gave in the 50s called The Education of the Artist. And it was, you know, go to a lot of schools, have a lot of jobs, draw all the time. It's that a life of an artist is very rich with experience. And generally that you would get good when you get old. I just felt like that was, I came from very conservative roots. What can I tell you? And then I feel like I'm good. I'm here now.
You've put in some work.
Yeah, it's important. And I've always looked to older people to learn from, or not learn from. You know, it works that way. And enjoyed being around younger people and giving them everything I know, like open book kind of thing, teaching. So I'm moving in the timeline, and I'm extremely happy about it.
So it seems like, well, I love hearing that. I feel your happiness. I think that's, it's so resonant in conversation with you. So if you're taking with you from this, I mean, it hasn't fully happened yet.
No,
so
I know.
So talk about moving across timelines. That's what
Yeah.
you're doing now. So for this installation, this public project that hasn't happened quite yet, we already can maybe anticipate that you're going to take with you the possibility of working with others in these kinds of collaborative ways that might feel a little bit
Yeah.
like an extension of an ongoing, rich, decades-long practice. Is there anything else? Because we're as we wrap up, I wanted to think about any other pieces of this that you want to pull with you.
Yeah, you know what, been having a lot of conversations about this thing that hasn't happened yet, which is so rare for me because I never want to talk about a piece until it is made. So, you know,
Here we are.
hope that works. Artists, you know what I mean. But the thing is, in a recent conversation, I realized that I have developed a position around materials and longevity that has gotten pretty comfortable, and that maybe what will happen with this is that I will have to challenge myself to ask what would I put outside that is lasts a long time. That I would have to flip the terms on myself to really learn what all this has been about.
Well, that's a great question for a conversation about public art.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right now, I'd like to give them ephemerality.
Yes, and
Later.
next, yeah.
Maybe some bronze.
Okay. Oh, what a perfect ending. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Sheila. And thank all of you. Thank you, some bronze.
Oh, that's so good.
Good morning. My name is Truth Murray Cole, and I'm Senior Curatorial Manager at Madison Square Park Conservancy. Thank you, Sheila Pepe and Jenny Goldstein, for your illuminating keynote conversation. And now, we are thrilled to begin our panel discussion with artists Zenobia Bailey, Zoe Buckman, Ana Maria Hernando, and Gilbert Vicario, Chief Curator at Perez Art Museum, Miami. Legacy Russell, Executive Director and Chief Curator of The Kitchen, will moderate. Their full bios can be found in the program. The panel will be followed by audience questions.
For me. I really apologise. Where's the clicker?
It's on stage already.
Oh, I go there. I'm in the wrong spot. Sorry, I'm a disaster.
Oh.
What did I just do? Oh, God.
It's fine. We're here. We're here, right?
Oy vey. All right.
Well, it's so fantastic to be here. My name is Legacy Russell. I'm the Executive Director and Chief Curator of the Kitchen. And that suspenseful pause really was not intentional, but really appropriate, I think, for our phenomenal panelists that are here with us today. So I'm going to begin with some brief presentations by these brilliant individuals that are sharing the stage, thinking very much so about this question of continuing in the thread of dialogue around textile-based practices and the histories therein. So I believe, actually, Zoe, are you getting us started?
No.
Zenobia is going to get us started, yeah. I encourage each of you to spend some time with the bios that are in the program. They are phenomenal and really will knock your socks off. But recognizing our time today, we're going to dive in.
Okay. Thank you all for being here and for allowing me to be a part of this presentation. Okay. My work is about visual engineering in the rural and the urban African-American aesthetic of the popular culture of funk, using crochet and recycled material as my medium, and with the luxury of time to explore the materials of the 21st century. The first image is, this is Sister Paradise. This is based on my mother, who was a fierce homemaker, caregiver, and a domestic worker who Martha Stewart would worship her. I mean, back in the day, domestic workers catered formal dinners for the families and stuff. You know, they did everything. Even one of my mother's friends, she did the whole wedding for the family, including the bride's dress. But this is an all crocheted piece. It's an apron and a dress, a crown, and the apron has a tail on it. It's the whole story. This is a contemporary folktale character. And the next piece, this is a studio shot. This is one of my interns creating utilitarian crochet pieces like furnishings and stuff. But this is for like studying, working, meditating, but it's an inspirational station. The third one, this is a piece that I did for Facebook. This is an engineer's floor, but I wanted to create an energy-based environment for the engineers to work in. I wanted it to be a high energy, but a funky, mellow kind of energy that they would, enjoy working in. And they said it worked, And this is a piece in Florida. Oh, that was the New York Facebook headquarters. This is a piece in Florida can't think of the, St. Petersburg, Florida. It's a pier. It's called Spa Beach. And this is originally the piece was crocheted and it was scanned and it was put into glass mosaic piece, and there's mirrors, little broken mirrors all in there, so when you look at it, it sparkles. But I wanted it to face the sunrise, so it's called Morning Stars for all the people that get up in the morning and do the running and everything. It's for their morning energy, so it's for all the morning stars that get out there and do their thing in the morning. And this is the Hudson Yards number 7 subway line, and this is for also this. It's an energy space, just for people in the morning when they come in the evening, but it's a pretty much active area. So I just wanted it to be a place of energy, and it kind of represents the cosmos. My family is an agricultural. They were sharecroppers, and first generation sharecroppers. So I was raised by sharecroppers from Oklahoma, in Texas. But they were working from, their whole source of everything was the almanac. And so they based everything on the cosmos and everything, you know, the way we ate, the way they planted. But it's a whole story about that. But anyway, that was it. And this is the ceiling of the Martin Luther King Library in Washington, D.C., the Martin Luther King Memorial Library. This is the grand reading room. And what it is, there's round metal circles, but inside it's crocheted 26 gauge copper wire. I'm gonna pass this around so you can see this, but you can't really see the copper wire in the piece. So, thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you. So, it's not delicate, so you can, you know, so, and I wanted copper wire because copper is cleansing, and it has a certain kind of conducting energy. Like I said, this is like visual engineering for frequency and vibrations for in the environment. So that's one of my materials that I work on. And this is a piece that I did in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It was at working classroom. I don't know why I closed my eyes. I'm looking right at the notes here. We did a piece for young people this is for the Day of the Dead, but we did it in celebration of young people that had died from really junk food, you know, juvenile diseases and everything. And everything was made out of recycled material, newspapers, cardboard boxes from Costco and stuff. And this is something that I was raised with too, because we really didn't have toys. And so my mother kind of taught us how to just make stuff with whatever we had. And sometimes, you know, I couldn't figure out how to do a certain thing that I wanted to do. And my mother didn't know how to do what I wanted to do. And then she said, you know, I bet you could do it. So like that was the basic instructions on how to do anything that I did was, I bet you can do it. So that's what we did.
I want to quickly hop in because I want to make sure that we give time for each of the presentations.
So
but we're going to
sorry.
get actually into some of the history shortly.
You.
So I'm excited to do that, and we'll pass along to Zoe.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank
Good,
you.
thank you.
I'm sorry.
Hi, Zoe Buckman, artist, apparently. Okay, so I'm going to cycle through the images real quick, but I think this is a good place to start because this was in my first solo show and I'd just become a mother. And I realize now that I've returned to the kitchen table and the family and the home a lot in my work. And I didn't realize that I started there in a way. I had machine embroidered at the time, a table runner that belonged to my grandmother. And this work was really about death, honestly. Became a mom, thought about death a lot. It was about time and mortality. And most of my work, all of my work actually looks at either birth, miscarriage, and abortion, all of which I've had personal experience of, or the home as a place of trauma, both in, for me, gendered violence within relationships, but also inherited violence. I was, you know, looking at my mother, my ancestors, and my girlfriends. This had a sound piece, and this was after I'd had abortion. 1 minute, oh shit, all right, fuck that. Yeah, okay, let's cycle through. Abortion, divorce, new relationship, violent one, shitty one, psychologically, sexually, and physically violent. And I started to look, and then my mum was dying. It was a great year. And I started to look at the home and the inevitability of bleeding, bruising, having our power taken away from us, and the attempt to cover up these things. And so I started to make this work, and then the Me Too, very slight, quick moment happened, and I think people assigned this work to that, but it actually didn't come from that at all. For me, it came from my personal experience. I wrote this long poem. It's called Show Me Your Bruises Then, which I later made a 3-channel video installation of. It's a performance with an actress called Kush Jumbo. There's some text from it. Sienna Miller and myself. Hard stop, fuck. That's Kush there. That piece was recently acquired by the National Portrait Gallery, which is a big deal for me because I used to go there as a kid for my abortion cluster. And I'm just going to end right here. It says stop, so I will stop. But please come to my solo show in September here in New York. Here's some new work, and that's me.
Thank you. Ana Maria is next.
I am Ana Maria Hernando, originally from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I am a multidisciplinary artist. I work in many mediums, but here today I will share some of the work that I have done more in the public realm. For these large installations, I use a lot of textiles. I come from a family of textiles. Textiles is one of the languages we speak. And I have used a lot of different fabrics, but in the last years, I have been focusing a lot in tulle. It's hard to speak, and the images are behind. So I have done pieces outside. I have done, this other one is a billboard in downtown Denver where I used 14 miles of tulle. This is a piece that was at the Moody Center this year. And, you know, tulle as a fabric has so many connotations and messages from the fairy tale world. It's a fabric that's used a lot for ballerinas and for brides. And it's connected in the mind of society with a kind of fantasized happy fragility for the feminine, with a message where all is good when women delegate their own agency, when women are innocent and empty for the others to feel their will, their desires, just a mirror for the society. So I take this fabric that is so full of connotations, and I bring it and I fill it with an abundance that transforms softness into less, a discrete quality, but more of a function of power. And for me, that's the feminine, full of generosity, of love, of clarity, and of a presence that it's so enormous, so inundating us that wants for nothing. It is presence in itself.
Thank you, Ana Maria. I'm going to ask to pass along to our final presenter. Welcome, Gilbert.
Am I on? Yeah.
You're on.
Okay. So just a little visual tour of the last 10 years in curatorial practice. This was a project that I did with Phillida Barlow a few years back. And I'm showing it because I wanted to honor her. She passed away this year, and I understand that she also has a public art commission that I think is opening next week. So just a little brief view of that exhibition. Actually, the audience here is probably more than actually saw the show in Des Moines. But it was really, it'll give you an idea of the scale of the way that she approached sculpture in a built environment, 11 awnings, which is just a really incredible piece, and really just happy to be able to share this with you. And I think when we get to the conversation, I think a lot of ideas that are embedded in these projects will be able to be articulated more clearly. I was able to show 55 drawings that Phillida made going back to the 1960s, many of which were basically packed up in boxes and hadn't been opened in 40 years. And this, what you're looking at here, was actually this imagined, an exhibition with her contemporaries in the guise of works in the collection, Magdalena Abakanowicz, as you can see here, Michelangelo Pistoletto in the background, and then an assortment of her drawings. And then we get to Sheila Pepe, Hot Mess Formalism, which I did at the Phoenix Art Museum, and just really quickly showing some of installation shots. I think this is called 92 BCE, before emperors, I think. Not a good year for emperors. Really, again, showing really difficult work. And then finally, Cecilia Vicuña Equipo Gut, a piece that we acquired at Perez Art Museum and that we will be installing in the next couple of months, and which connects to a lot of thinking that I've been doing around her work and around our permanent collection. And I will stop there.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to bring us back actually to where we began, because I think it's useful for us to kind of walk through, and I'm sorry to move so quickly. What each of our presenters just did was very difficult because the practices of each are just so complex and profound. But I want maybe to start with Zenobia to talk a little bit about this question of functional design, and that's F-U-N-K, functional, just to make sure that we're clear. Zenobia, you coined this term, and I think it has been immensely powerful, especially as we, of course, spend time with these images on the screen, thinking very deeply about what I know that you've spoken about in terms of this energy work, and how, of course, that relates to kind of call on your words, this question of the cosmos. Can you share with us a little bit about what that means? Like, how do you put the funk in functional?
Okay. Well, it's kind of like based on my mother's practice as a domestic worker. I would see how she could really enhance an environment just by things that she did. Like this piece here, this is inspired by how my mother, and this is how she would do our interiors at home. She would go to the thrift stores and buy these secondhand crochet pieces and quilts, and she would drape them over our furniture, which is always, secondhand. But the way that she would tuck them and drape them, it was so elegant. And she created what we would call now an installation in our living room that was so charged, And it was the way she would actually choose the crochet pieces or the quilts. That it was about. She didn't make quilts or crochet herself. She was like the curator, of the living room, and really all the rooms. Because I'm from Washington State, and all of us had to have about 6 blankets on the foot of our bed because we had a wood-burning stove house. So the heat always stayed in the living room. So in the bedrooms, we didn't really get the heat that much. So we had to have piles and piles of these beautiful secondhand quilts and crochet pieces. So every room pretty much looked like an installation to me. And when I had went to school, am I taking too long? When I went to school,
wonderful,
and came back home for the first time and saw our house from the point of view of what I was studying in school, I saw it. I saw like this energy, and she would do the same thing for the homes that she worked in. My mother worked in 5 homes at one time, and then including our home, which was 6, but we were the homemakers, and the kids were the homemakers. So we kind of picked up on her craft that she was doing. So I was studying industrial design, and that's designing for mass production, but my aesthetic just was not fitting into that minimalist aesthetic. To me, it didn't have much of an energy. So I wanted to incorporate this funky aesthetic, which it's, pretty much all the popular musicians, when they talk about funk, it came from their household, because that's where they get the energy for their music,
Right.
from the household. George Clinton will tell you that.
Oh, absolutely.
So, I mean, that's the audio, the ambience of the environment is the music. But then there's a visual component, which, we really didn't have the luxury of time to really develop it. And I'm snatching time.
Absolutely.
And thank goodness for public art pieces, I'm able to develop it, and put it in public places where the energy hopefully is enhancing the environment and people that pass through there.
I appreciate that. And Zoe, I want to maybe turn to thinking about this question of energy of the work and of really the act of production as healing work. It feels really meaningful for us to reflect, of course, on this notion of domestic violence, and I know that as well you've created work that has meditated on illness as well, and reflecting on these questions of loss and precarity within one's private life and bringing that into the public realm, even of course that apart from the Me Too moment. Is something that's immensely vulnerable. So, for me, as I think about, what Zenobia just shared, it's resonant because there is a sonic frequency, this question of kind of who's in the room and who's not only being listened to, but being believed.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what that means to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I feel like to answer the question, I just also want to mention the context of the pandemic, because I'm realizing that it was actually very formative for me in that I hadn't depicted actual living female forms before then. I didn't know how to without contributing to the over-objectification of women within art. And I didn't feel empowered to, so I would find ways to depict our uteruses, what we wear, what we sit on, all of these like vintage found objects, but never actually us. And then when lockdown hit, I was still very much grieving my mother, but also so many losses, from ones pertaining to birth to ones pertaining to breakups and heartbreak and all of this. And then all my family's in London, and I'm alone, completely alone. I make my work alone, so it's already pretty fucking solitary. And then I was like, oh no, like it's way more solitary now. And I missed my girlfriend so much. And I think like a lot of us, sorry, I'm getting emotional there. I found myself looking back at pictures, like on my phone, frankly, of my girlfriends, my sisters, that like my community. And I was really just so struck by how everyone's a survivor. I hadn't really given pause to it. And then I was like, she survived 2 fucking cancers, a rape, and the death of her mother. I remember, she was mugged outside my house. She got beat up, ran to my house when we were kids. I thought about all the women that I'm close to, and the commonality was the inevitability of violence and grief, but also how, and I guess this is an energy thing, I am drawn to women and femmes who just embody joy and celebrate their forms. And so that has been an energy that I've really wanted to take into this work. And so I've been depicting, yes, absolutely survivors, as you say, but like exclusively survivors, but also capturing these fleeting moments. I don't invite people into my studio and take photos of them. They're pictures that I've myself taken over the years. And I think part of it is about trying to somehow immortalize that fleeting moment of joy and connection and togetherness, because we never know when that's going to be taken away from us, because we're so often robbed. And I hope that answered your question.
It's super meaningful, and I think that it's also a wonderful segue to talk about your work, Ana Maria, and I'm going to move through these gorgeous slides to get to an image of your practice. But I know that the written word is something that actually is very meaningful to you, and it's something that we actually see less of, although of course your titles are poems in many ways. And so I just wanted, of course, to bring some of that poetry into the room. I know that Zoe as well uses the written word, and poetry is something that is immensely impactful within the presentation of the practice. But Ana Maria, within one of your poems, Cumulo, you write, "Cuando hablo y digo estas palabras, más palabras aparecen en mi boca. como estrellas nuevas relucientes, corriendo en el hilo de un arco, which translates to, when I speak and say these words, more words appear in my mouth like new stars, resplendent, running on the thread of an arch. So you've been, of course, drawing from the history of where you were born and raised, right? But also, I wonder if maybe you can share with us a little bit about what is this relationship between these materials that are kind of these ordinary materials as you give them extraordinary meaning and presence, and how you, of course, are also engaging this maybe architecture of poetry.
Thank you. So, as you might have noticed, English is not my first language. It's Spanish, and I'm constantly translating. And when I moved to the United States, words became so important, and they became kind of like in that poem, floating around me. I relate to language in a visual way, but this way of translating from one language to the other, but also as artists, how we are translators. We are translators of feelings, we have our antennas, whatever we are catching from the past, from the future, and we then mix it into our work. But in that poem, I'm talking about how sometimes you say something, and that something, that word that you say, brings other words that you were not planning on. But because of the presence of the word before, that other world has opened for you. And for me, when I'm working, and I love the circles of women, I'm intrigued by them. I grew up with groups of women, my grandmothers, my mom, coming together in the afternoon, everyone doing something, gossiping a lot, and in different cultures, I have seen these circles of women that they are way beyond the individuality of one, but how many times they come together with the purpose of thinking what's the best for the whole, where the ego is not present. The ego has no room in this circle. The circle is such a beautiful design of democracy, of no hierarchies, where all the it only works if all the voices come and have an equal presence. So language in that way, what I'm saying in that poem, also when we come together, and I include the work of other women, many times I invite others to work in my installations. You know, I come with a plan, but then what happens with the group, new things appear that were not in my plan, and that is fantastic. And it's kind of what happens with words. You put a little bit, and then it flowers in unexpected ways.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I appreciate that, and I think it's a really exciting moment as well to think about, of course, the relationship between words and practice, of course, how it helps us assert different types of space. I love this notion of the circle as being this kind of conceptual frame as we turn to your work. And of course, Gilbert, having you be the curator on the stage, other than myself, right, who, is thinking very much so about, how space is shaped. And it's a unique moment because we continue to have these discussions about monuments, and I love how Sheila really set the stage for us and pushing us further to think about ephemerality as being a core component of what practice can be, that maybe perhaps monuments do not need to stay forever, and perhaps that is the gendered exercise that we have to do to refuse that as a possibility of what public should look like. But I would love maybe for you to reflect, given your work with Sheila, on this question really of not only monumentality, but also this relationship to craft and domesticity, right? I'm kind of putting into quotes You know, we are in a week where literally, I think in the last several days, there was a magazine article and an issue that has come out that has kind of called textile work the new painting, right? And I kind of was both enjoying it, but also I was intrigued because I'm thinking, you know, painting is the new textile, right? Like in a strange way, depending on whose history you're reading. And so I think that there is something that's really necessary to reflect on this moment in time, right? Asking about what does it mean to have this exciting project of Sheila's work enter into this kind of public site, and of course then to have the dialogue across these phenomenal folks who are on the panel, who are really doing the work of pushing us further to think about really like the interiority of the practice and how that can be extended newly.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's a lot to unpack.
We're here to do it, right? And we've got like 3 minutes, I'm sure.
It's really great, but I mean, yeah, I mean, there are definitely conversations that are happening in parallel. There are curatorial conversations, there are artistic conversations, there are cultural conversations, all of which we can begin to understand. We can talk about crochet, we can talk about the history of that, which apparently started in South American countries, in Asia, and then came to Europe in the 19th century, and then made its way here. The idea of sculpture, of monumental sculpture, and the relationship to social practice and to social sculpture. That's a huge sort of divide there, and also just formally, again, this sort of hot mess formalism of Sheila's practice of how do you deal with work that doesn't behave the way social sculpture is supposed to behave? It's shape-shifting in a lot of ways. When you get it to the museum and you open up the box, it's like a mess. It's just like, what the hell? And it's very contingent on the artist being present. And again, going back to that idea of internalized knowledge is really important. And for me, all of this sort of wrapped up in a bigger discussion around indigeneity and indigenous knowledge that I think is so crucial at this moment. You know, everybody has a land acknowledgement statement, but really there's nothing more beyond that. And as a curator working in coming from Phoenix, Arizona, Phoenix Art Museum didn't have a land acknowledgement statement, which is just shocking to me. Moving to Miami, where we just recently discovered indigenous archaeology on a building project. It's completely shaping and rethinking the way I approach the permanent collection. So I'm really sort of doubling down on that idea of indigeneity and indigenous knowledge in my own practice. It's super important when it comes to the work of artists like Sheila Hicks, for example, who sort of rejected Yale and rejected Joseph and Annie Albers and started looking for information and knowledge in Mexico. She worked with Matias Garretts and Luis Barragan, and then she went down to Chile and began to understand and study indigenous practices, Mapuche cultures, and then in India. And I think that's sort of where we're at right now. My approach to the permanent collection is through that thread of indigeneity, and it's amazing how that can be traced. Talk about this, like the fact that there's an anonymity to craft, but as my friend who is in that field says, it's just you fucking contemporary art curators. You don't understand. There was somebody who made that. And it's just the fact that we don't acknowledge it. And
I think that's actually really important. I want to dig in a little bit there to this question of authorship. You know, of course, I appreciated the images of Gee's Bend that were shared at the top of our morning together. And you know, I always reflect as I go into spaces now and seeing Gee's Bend quilts being shown that, you know, often we miss part of the data of the work because we can't be under the work. And so, you know, Zenobia, I know that you have shared about these different types of materials, right, that were kind of at the foot of your bed, right? The room was kind of an installation and bringing us back to the site of your kind of beginnings and belongings and thinking about, you know, how installation as a practice can be expanded. I think it's really necessary to kind of acknowledge that we are thinking through this question of dimensionality across each of these bodies of work and as well, you know, what it means to be an author. So I'm wondering, you know, if, you know, one of our amazing panelists would maybe want to touch on that question a little bit, to think about this question of kind of who is the author, There always is, someone who is in the room. And maybe in Zoe, in your case, you're kind of at point standing in as proxy to other experiences that have been shared with you, but also, of course, sharing your own experience. But that, sort of lineage between different types of makers in relation to craft feels very critical.
Oh, well, it may seem indirect, but to me, the author is spiders and birds that make birds' nests and stuff, Because, and I found out that spiders have different aesthetics, because like a spider all spiders don't do spider webs like that. I've seen very abstract spider webs, and I've seen golden spider webs, and I've seen there's I don't know if you would call it an aesthetic, but to spider webs and even to birds' nests. I remember, after the West Indian Day Parade in Brooklyn, if you go along those trees and you see the birds' nests, they have all these feathers and sparkles all up in the birds' nest, So, that's for me.
Companion species collaborations. I love it. But Zoe, do you have a thought on this?
Yeah, I feel like I feel like both of you guys touch on something that is really moving to me, and I think I also draw on in my practice, which is the community and I guess that kind of idea of the collective unconscious. And I think that is especially strong within feminine spaces. I think that we, in a way, are very lucky that we do have a natural kind of propensity towards such things, just connection, spirituality, and the like. And that my experience is that during trauma or crisis or grief, it is the women who cook the food and bring the food round, who, like, when I've needed it, my girlfriend's drawn a bath for me and looked after me, and then I've been able to do that. And I don't think I'm actually answering your question at all, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think that the author is the community and the collective, but that we are all aligned within that through our parallels. Yeah, and I feel that with your work also.
Well, and running on your thread, how, for me, what I was talking before about the antennas, we pick up what's out there and what is ours or not. We have a little bit of an obsession about separate each other. This is me, this is you, when everything is weaved together. And I mean, as artists, we might be just those translators, and we might be in the spot where we are making something, but it's a gathering of so many voices. So authorship, it's of the community and the times.
I love that. And I think it's a perfect place to kind of turn to questions from the audience, thinking about this gathering of voices, thinking about, what a circle can do, right, in relationship to this question of public and public art. So I, of course, want to thank each of you, but of course also want to encourage those who are in the audience to ask a question. I think we have time for a couple. And you can kind of pop up to the front. There are some mics here.
You speak like a poet.
Any brave individuals with a question? Surely. Well, I guess I can ask. Oh, yes, please.
I'll be brave.
Will you please? Yeah.
Easy question. Do any of you, or can you tell us if you have upcoming exhibits here in New York, and when they'll be and where?
Oui.
Definitely.
Permanent installations, but I don't have any exhibits in New York right now.
Well, where's the installation, though?
Oh yeah, the installation. You mean the Hudson Yards?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a permanent installation. 34th.
So it's on view. Like, you must see it, and I encourage all of you.
I'm gonna go.
Exactly. I mean, I have to say, it totally shifts the psychic energy of going into that space.
I hope so. I tried to put it in there.
Yeah. So that's a very special project to see. And Zoe, what about you? You mentioned an upcoming show.
So I'm working my tissue off right now for my solo show, which is September 5th here in New York. Please, everyone come, please. I'm nervous. I haven't had a solo show in New York since 2019, so come give me some love. That's at a gallery called Lyles and King downtown. I've got some works going to some group shows at SF, MoMA, and the Broad. And then next year, not that you asked about next year, but I'm having my first museum solo show, and I'm also shit scared about that one, and that because that is at Dallas Contemporary, and I've never been to Texas, and I'm excited to go to Texas, but it is going to be almost a survey show of work that looks at abortion, birth and miscarriage, and these things, and so I'm scared.
We're going to be sending you all that good energy.
Thank you.
Yes, I mean, Texas needs it. But Ana Maria, what about you?
So I have some shows, none in New York, but I'm working on several shows for this summer. One is called Making a Mountain, where I'm inviting people to come with their sewing machine, and we will be sitting all in a circle and sewing raffle tulle on strands. And as we sew, it will be building in the center. It will become a mount and hopefully a mountain. And that will be in Boulder, Colorado. And then I have other shows in Denver, there are other conversations, and then next year at the National Museum of Women in the Arts in April 14th, representing Colorado.
Wonderful.
For the women to watch.
Yay. It's exciting. I don't want to leave our curator.
I have a show. I actually have a show opening in 2 weeks at the Cheech in Riverside.
Yes.
Which is Chicano AOX Body that I'm doing with Cecilia Fajardo-Hill and Marissa Del Toro, which is a 50-year look at Chicano art practice through the lens of performance and conceptual art. So
That's so fantastic. What a wonderful question. Thank you. Another question here. Would you mind?
I just want to point out that Zenobia's work, there are two pieces. That people, when you go to see the Hudson Yards, you have to go to both entrances. There are two pieces on the scale. It's not just the one. So,
Thank you. Don't miss it. I agree. Thank you for that. And I see a question here, but actually, can you try to come up to a mic? Is that possible? That would be helpful. Thank you so much.
Hello. This is being very brave. I didn't want to come down, but I'm here.
Thank you for that.
My question is, how do you serve the thin line between doing work for the public, about the public, and yourself as an artist? Maintaining your authenticity, but making sure you serve the public.
That's a pretty funky question. I'm just saying.
I like that. I only have one small thing to say about that, which is that I've tried. I didn't put any slides in of my public installations, but I had whatever. It doesn't matter. I've done quite a few things, from billboards to Times Square to a public sculpture, and I guess what I've really tried to do is to not underestimate the public and just be like, it's not like only smart people go to museums and there aren't smart people on the street. Like, fuck that. Like, just if I don't want to differentiate between my personal practice thematically and work that I make for the public realm. I just have to obviously respect that if there are constraints and some things that are not appropriate, all right, God bless, we edit. But certainly I think that we must not dumb anything down for public art. Yeah, quite the opposite, probably.
Right, so kind of recognizing where to meet people, right?
Yeah.
In terms of where they're at. Are there other thoughts on that?
No, I'm, for me, my public pieces have been temporary. And in that way, there are a lot of unknowns and things like the first slide I showed. It was outside, up in the mountains in Colorado, and the other was the wind and the storm. And you plan all of these other things, but then I realized that that piece needed a component of me going every day with the ladder and fluffing the cloud. And that is a lot of what artists do. We fluff the clouds. These kind of, activities that are not in accounting books. They are invisible, but we talk about the invisible. And so when you are out there and the more people and more elements and the spiders and the birds, all of that has a voice with your piece that there's no way to control it. And probably that's part of the beauty of it. When you can relate to the imperfection of what we do. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question. Oh my gosh, all the way back here. Dare we? Do you want to try to project?
Sam?
Did you hear that? Thinking about the Farmer's Almanac in relationship to your work and practice, and the relationship as well to, I think, as you mentioned, with your family, right? Kind of this deep dynamic in terms of learning from the land, learning from the natural universe.
Yeah. I'm trying to say this real quick.
Oh, no, please.
Take your time.
We got time.
The Farmer's Almanac, we pretty much lived by that because we were living off the land. My father would go, well, sometimes the whole family would go fishing. And the almanac would tell us when certain schools of fish were coming through, the catfish, the salmons, and, the crawdads or whatever, So we would know when to go fishing and everything. But what I was thinking about, the Farmer's Almanac and human movement, like how we interact, because I feel like a lot of things are cosmic anyway, how we move and like this gathering here and all of us, it's very cosmic, how it's brought together by Brooke and, Truth and, and yourself. And I try to incorporate that in my work, like the piece at the Hudson Yards, it's a cosmic story, and I don't want to get into it too much because we don't have time. But anyway, it all I'm trying to work on, just the vibration and the frequency of that, of how we move, and especially women, we're kind of, our cycles through a certain age, and I don't know after we're not having the cycle anymore, we're still connected to the cosmos.
Yeah.
But, and even before that, and then too, I don't feel like men should have been left out of that because like and the other animals, we know when the deer, if you hunt for deers, when they're having their babies and when they're out, they're sleeping, the bears and all like that. In Washington State, they go hunting for bear for food, So like that whole cycle, squirrels, rabbits, all like that, But with society, I think, there's a structure to how we move and interact and be productive too, So, and I'm just trying to work with that in my practice, trying to do Leonardo da Vinci kind of thing, with crochet.
But with spiders.
Right.
Recognizing that. Thank you each so much. What a pleasure and honor to be in dialogue with you. And thank you as well. And to Madison Square Park, of course, Brooke and Truth.
you out.
No.
You just have to run to the back.
I understand. Thank you, Zenobia Bailey, Zoe Buckman, Anna Maria Hernando, and Gilbert Vicario and Legacy Russell for your searching dialogue on the potential of materials and public space. We are now excited to welcome artist Shahzia Sikander and Tom Finkelpearl, social practice teaching scholar in residence, the City University of New York, and former commissioner of the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, for their keynote conversation. Their full bios can be found in the program.
All right, we're good at these mics are on. Okay, we're going to start with Shahzia talking about her incredible work. It is the occasion for our discussion.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor for me to be here and share Havah, to breathe air life, the project that I'm deeply grateful to Madison Square Park Conservancy to have given me the opportunity to create. So I also want to thank Tom Finkelpearl, who has been a friend and mentor for decades, and whose books, What We Made and Dialogues in Public Art, were very meaningful. So Havah, to breathe air life, has two sculptures, an animation and an AR component. The 18-foot sculpture in the Madison Square Park is titled Witness, and the 8-foot sculpture on the roof of the courthouse is titled Now, both culling a feminine, powerful representation of wisdom, so resilience. So for my inspiration, I looked into my own practice as a painter of past 25 years to locate the feminine ethos and the iconography. So for example, this idea of the expandable skirt that continues to carry the baggage. She keeps accumulating the baggage, and she keeps on moving. And that, the sort of female protagonists that have been present in my work, how they have resisted simplistic categorizations or have refuted the colonial or the male gaze. So there's that attention to the gendered body. Women, they embody an androgynous, confident, playful form, and they're tied to the past, but in creative ways. And I kind of draw on Central, Southeast Asian contemporary culture, and those influences are present here. So taking inspiration also from the spectacular stained glass ceiling dome of the Appellate Courthouse, its translucency, defined architectural properties. So I thought of reimagining the dome as a house, a space demarcating a site of renewal. And the inverted dome sort of transformed into the metal frame that became the skirt. So I was looking at the skirts that were in the paintings that I'd done 20 plus years ago, as well as the architecture. And mapped on this metal structure is also the word Havah, which means air, atmosphere, to breathe. It's designed in glass mosaic. It also is a Urdu word which can be read as Eve, and I was playing on the idea of Eve as a perhaps can be seen as the first lawbreaker. So I was kind of playing in this manner of multivalence, even in the idea of the choices of that are contributing to the construction of the sculpture. And the female herself is also very buoyant, and she's sort of afloat. So there's reference to air that is around her, where her feet are not touching the grass and surrounding her, keeping her afloat. So I began experimenting with glass and stone mosaic in 2015, and the mosaics are conceived as paintings. They are left ungrouted to give them also a little bit of a sculptural dimension. And the first large-scale work is at the Princeton University, but you can also see this particular signature image of the feminine, which is present there, but it's at the center of the work, and it's a character in my practice that has had many iterations. So in 2000, I just wanted to bring attention to this particular work, that same character was in one of the murals that I was making. I was commissioned by Skadden Arps law firm. And I looked at images like the one that is in the courthouse, the one on the left. And I was looking at the representation of how the power of the law, but I changed its race. And I was playing from iconography outside of the Western canon. And after 9/11, in the midst of all of that, I was told that the work was very violent. And I was asked to remove it. So anyway, the interesting idea here is that it is sort of the same ethos and the same character that 20 plus years later is also on the roof of the courthouse, where many of the lawyers probably were sworn in. But art and judicial norms are constantly being reevaluated and interpreted in the world. So both embody a dynamic, which is alive and tethered to its present moment. So that form of the feminine is stylized, enigmatic, female fluid. And the body itself, you can see that it has forms that are self-rooted. She can carry the roots wherever she goes. She also emerges on the lotus plant, which functions as her plinth. I didn't want her to borrow the same kind of plinth that had been there from white male presentation. So I thought that it would be something that is again present in my paintings, and it has intangible ideas of humility, awakening, clarity. So a theme that I could play with, and a paradox also in the assimilation versus rootedness. So the roots of the lotus plant that are not visible always in soiled water, how they could be echoed outside. And then there are paintings that I'd been doing where I was playing on hyphenated identities and what constitutes an assimilated immigrant in America. So kind of playing off of that and then bringing that into the sculpture now, which is of course for me also the perspective and ethos of New York City with its feminine empowerment in multiple representations. But for me as an artist, I'm always thinking, like, how can I create work which is wondrous, but also can produce thought and difference? So I usually think through my hand. So everything is done first as a sketch. Even all the sculptural work was really about drawings, and then the drawings became 3D, and then the 3D drawings back and forth through the process of thought and hand and mind, and how that creates an armature of research, clarification of ideas, and connects thought to gesture, to action, to practice. So I'll stop here, and we can refer to elements that are in the work itself. There's this reference to hair, the jabot. There are many symbolic elements that may not be what people usually have been projected. Like the reference is not to Medusa. As you can see, it's to other syncretic histories and traditions in Asia and Africa as well. So
first of all, I'm going to suggest we Actually,
Okay.
we turned our chairs so we could see. We're looking over the shoulder. But now let's face the audience a little bit more. So that's a great introduction. And I think it's particularly great because of all the different ideas you're weaving together. There's a lot of complexity to your thought process. And then it's public art, so that's what you think, but that's not what Fox News thinks, right? So we're in public, and by the way, the overall reaction to this, I think, has been very, very positive, and we'll get to that in a minute. But after your piece got put up, there was a kind of right-wing backlash, and both in Fox News and the right-wing columnist Ross Dohat in the New York Times. So I just wanted to talk about that question of interpretation and sort of how did you see this play out, and how did you feel about the interpretations of your work by, let's say, on Fox News?
Oh, I first of all, I think I was a little bit shocked that there was so much attention and that the work had triggered people. And then I also was curious to see how, as a painter, what happens when you put paintings in any particular space, and when could a painting exist as a sculpture? So what are the stakes and what happens? So it was really an exercise in understanding and learning that somehow the sculpture takes a different imagination or real estate in a popular imagination that you're taking space, which is perhaps not.
But I'd say not just sculpture, but public sculpture.
Public sculpture,
yeah.
And so so it was really a learning thing. Like it was so ridiculous often at times because obviously many had not even seen the sculpture or the work or understood anything. So it was like what types of narratives, take on popular imagination? Where do certain narratives go? And so I became interested in that aspect of understanding.
So I don't know how many people in the audience are aware of what the criticisms were, but there was an article in the New York Times by Ross Dohat who essentially accused it of being anti-Christian. So Ross Dohat is a Catholic columnist, unapologetically religious Catholic writer. And so I was actually reminded a little bit of the Giuliani attack on the Brooklyn Museum and Crisafilli's depiction of the Virgin Mary, where a right-wing mayor decided that he put a particular interpretation of anti-Christianity or anti-Catholicism onto a work of art. And I just wonder if any of that was reverberated. Maybe you weren't. I'm a little older than Shahzia, so I was lived through that shit, man. What about that very single-minded interpretation by the author? And it's the New York Times, by the way. It's not.
Well, I went to a Catholic school in Pakistan, and so it was really interesting for me to see how threatened somebody felt through the work, and it was very opaque. I couldn't really fully understand what the argument was, but it seemed like it was xenophobic too, and basically against multiplicity, against a threat. Again, definitely, I think it's very misogynist also. So that idea, was very clear to me. There were many people who shared very different opinions on how they read that particular feedback. Like the feedback was very varied depending who I was asking.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it was so one of the questions that we were talking about is that this idea, can you say that there is something that is explicitly understood to be a wrong interpretation? So in a museum, you're always talking about ambiguity and multiple interpretations, but it doesn't mean necessarily that any interpretation is somehow a warranted interpretation. I was just thinking about what if there was a sculpture, and the sculpture was, I don't know, by a Christian artist, and it was kind of an abstract shape that looked like a J, and it's out front of a particular building, and then it's accused somehow of anti-Semitism. I can talk about that because my name's Finkelpearl, right? So I'm just saying, what is it possible for you to say, or for people to say, this is not a warranted, or not a meaningful, or not a correct interpretation of your work, or is it just open for interpretation and you don't happen to agree with that interpretation?
Well, I think that for me, the interpretation is going to be very varied. And in this particular project, I was welcoming the range of opinions people were projecting. It was reaching a very different audience also, so it didn't bother me that that it shifted so extremely. Personally, it didn't bother me. I also realized that how the context of the work being on the roof of the courthouse was bringing in a deeper fear of how usually the feminine is often a marker of that fear that lurks when things are changing or shifting. So that was a very perfect way for me to enter whatever you may call it, criticism or lack of understanding of the work, that it was triggering the fear. And that was really, it validates this idea that is sort of a theme in my work, that women and their relationship to power.
You know, I just have to say I'm always amazed at the tolerance that artists have for attacks on their work. So let's reel back the time, 5 years or so. So there was a series of controversies around public art in New York City, and the mayor, I was working as the Commissioner of Cultural Affairs at the time, the mayor asked me to co-chair a commission on monuments. Like, so what should we do when there's a controversy was the basic question we were asked. And Darren Walker and I were the chairs, and one of the people on that esteemed committee was Shahzia. So I just wanted to ask you how your feelings and thinking about public art developed through that or through those years since since being on the Monuments Commission.
That was a fantastic opportunity for me, so thank you for have invited me. What I learned really was the kind of how invested people get whenever they think about monuments or art that is going to live forever. And that was one thing I also wanted to share was like when my project is a temporary project. Also, I was very clear that no particular individual or one stance can represent culture, histories, or a particular time frame in any moment of past or present or future. So it was intended in that way, but how people's imagination gets sparked that this is us and we are represented by this and we're going to fight for its extended stay, and the level of investment that public had. And they may not be even aware of certain works, which they weren't. In many cases, it was just that when you brought attention that, oh, we may be removing or we may be understanding something. So it made me think, obviously, how the lack of women represented in those narratives, but also the problematic histories there. And then really like the maintenance of public art is really something that is not really understood and shielded from that space. So what is it that we're talking about? So all these aspects around the permanence or the ephemerality or the lack of diversity, or how do we stretch and struggle and move this conversation forward. And at that time, I think we were discussing which women artists could be represented and how do women participate, right? Yeah. So I did imagine, I was like, oh, I would love to do something, but it was just in my head.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that came out, and Brooke referred to it earlier, is that the vast majority of people represented in public space who are historical figures are men. I mean, it's like extreme, hundreds to one. However, the most famous piece of public sculpture in New York City is an allegorical figure of a woman, the Statue of Liberty. So there are allegorical figures of women, figures of justice, etc. So just thinking about, so up there on the courthouse, you got Confucius, an actual historical Chinese guy. What about the idea of the allegorical figure versus the idea of you could have chosen an individual woman to represent as well. But what went into that thought process?
I was really interested in taking the feminine ethos that's in the present in my work. And it was like, it's usually through ink and fluid material and two-dimensional imagery. So I wanted to see if that could exist in a sculptural space and what would happen and how to keep that tension between something very fluid against the volume and mass implied in the scale of the sculpture, but that tension, and then also something, the form that was created with ink, where the ink sort of drips and loops back into the larger pool and puddles, sort of the idea of the feminine as more amorphous, like self, and rooted back into its, the limbs are rooted back, and it can carry its roots wherever it goes, so it's more about a kind of a stretching the idea of time. So perhaps the space as a more of a collective space for women than necessarily an individual. And even the initially it was without a face. And I remember like speaking to my younger students, and they were like, well, if it's going to be on the roof, all the men have, it's a stark silhouette. They have a face, and men never think, oh, we should remove their faces to put the body there. Why are we talking always faceless as perhaps reference to Eurasia, but like faceless is also equating to voiceless. And so I went back again into my own sort of his paintings, and I had a show at the Morgan Library a year and a half ago, so perhaps that was one of the reasons why I was digging back into my own practice, because I was seeing so many of my own artwork after 20 plus years. So there was a painting I had done in soon after 9/11, which basically has the feminine face with horns as an image of resistance against the very paternalistic representation of women, quote unquote, the war in Afghanistan to save Muslim women. So I was like, how do I counter something that is so paternalistic and problematic in a time which is so deeply divided in the country? So around women courage and a resistance to this sort of cliche and stereotyping and using of Muslim feminine space. So I chose that image.
So I would say a concise summary of what you just said is, it would not have been consistent with your practice to put a portrait of Shirley Chisholm on the roof there. That's more what you do, is this allegorical combination. Yeah. So I was just thinking about, so when you talk the wonderful Kendall Henry, who's involved still in commissioning all these public artworks, the difference between a public commission, which is paid for with public money on public property, versus the more fluid commissioning process that you went under. So I have to say that having lived in and run the Percent for Art program back in the day in the 90s, I was a little bit envious of the process and the fluidity of the process. So I just wonder if you could explain to our friends how this kind of developed a bit. Yeah.
So I was invited around that time in summer of 21. And I think at that time, Madison Square Park Conservancy also invited the courthouse justices to come visit the show that was up at the Morgan Library. And I think a very spontaneous conversation. It wasn't like the project was not commissioned by the courthouse. The courthouse they came to my show because they were invited by Madison Square Park Conservancy, but it wasn't with the intent that, oh, we are involving them into a project. It's just that then when I went to visit the courthouse, I also became very interested in this empty plinth, which was on the roof, and I wondered why, 75 years nobody had put something there, and the conversation started very organically, and it kind of, they pivoted from animations to sculpture. So there was a lot of freedom in the process. It was always part of the Madison Square Park's temporary artist projects. So there was never this thing that it's going to be there commissioned for.
But having
long
spoken
time.
to one of the judges, I know that they're very eager, possibly to keep it for a longer period of time. But there's this idea that you were invited to make this. You were invited by Madison Square Park, but also the court wanted you there. That's a very different situation from the city coming and saying, we're going to put a public sculpture in your neighborhood. You're not necessarily going to get to choose the artist. It was a much more fluid. So again, that's the envious side I have of that idea. You actually were invited. And they're fighting for, are they fighting for it to keep it longer? Or I don't know what the deal is with that.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
We're not sure, okay.
Yet either, but I do want to clarify, like, it wasn't like the courthouse was inviting me to come and do this piece. It was literally a collaborative in spirit. The proximity of the courthouse and to the park kind of made sense that, maybe, they can be collaborative partners. It's just that once you start engaging with the stakeholders and the people, the receptiveness and the curiosity of the justices that I worked with, it was just like phenomenal. And so that I also want to emphasize that, yes, in this process, there were many bridges that were built, and perhaps they will open up room and doors for more artistic projects that can happen at that particular courthouse and maybe more courthouses in the country.
Yeah, in fact, they've written a manifesto advocating more representation of women, et cetera. So I'm reminded of, in the Queens Museum, we invited Tanya Bergera to do a project in Corona, Queens. It was coming to an end after a year, and I was on the elevator at the Queens Museum one time, and I was surrounded by a group of women from the neighborhood who said, you can't let this stop. And I'd never heard people in the neighborhood say that about an art project. And actually we ended up going on for 7 years. But the impetus or the feeling or the power of the community coming to me as the director and saying, we want that, the power was in their hands to request it or request a continuation. And I do feel some of that energy happening at the courthouse. Yeah. So I have one more question. I think my timer says we have 5 minutes and 33 seconds left. Okay. So one of the questions, and I don't want to talk about the article, but Seth Rodney wrote an article saying, are we asking too much of public art, or something like that. So this idea of what do we ask of public art versus what do we ask of art that's in a museum. And one of the things that I feel good about public art is you often are interrogating the entire structure. Like people are saying, this is public money. How could you possibly spend public money on X, Y, and Z? When you go into the Metropolitan Museum, which is a city-owned property and gets $29 million, including energy, from the city every year, far exceeding the entire public art budget, nobody comes in and says, that's public money. I should be able to tell you what's on the walls, right?
Absolutely.
So what's asked of public art is more in-depth, I feel. And so the idea that you could have, you had maybe similar images in your Morgan library show, but you're not on Fox News, right? You're not on Fox News because it's not in public. So I just wonder about that. What is being asked of you, or are you happy to be asked to, in a way, think bigger pictures socially, or that's just irrelevant and that's what's happening on the side?
Very interesting lines here, right? I have to say that the Morgan show, I think my show was a game changer for the Morgan Library. It brought in so many kids, brown, black, many people, many young generation that had never really been to the museum. So I also felt that there was a different audience that came to an institution like the Morgan Library. Just a point to put out there. I also feel that in the same way, my experience with this first major public art project was that the types of social media, like the people that reach out or they go and see the art, has been so varied. There's a lot of people that respond to the work that wouldn't not necessarily may not come to the museum, or they may have missed the show, or they're not going to the museum regularly. So there is that experience, which is really how much the work reaches, who it reaches. I think in general, the institutions have this responsibility and burden right now. How do they represent what is happening in a city like New York, which is so full of immigrants and diverse cultures and histories and simultaneous things that are happening generationally, different stories. Whose story is more important? How do you represent that? They can only do 10, 12 shows a year. So there are missed stories too. And I think as an Asian American in this country, you do feel like you're between the black and white culture in general, that being Asian or anything, there's this dichotomy of like the same old thing, like East and West, or Islam and West, or oppressive and free, or, how do you break some of these very prevalent ways in which we the art history still talks about the othering? How do you break that othering? I think the public art opportunity allowed me to see that happen because so much public responded.
Yeah, and so you were breaking the othering at the Morgan as well, right?
Yeah.
So there's a similar thing, but when you talk about the audiences that came to the Morgan, and I was there several times, I know you're correct. I mean, I agree. You know better than I. That idea of who the audience was, and even how it was paid for, and who was J.P. Morgan, the wealth that was created to create that place, the robber barons of the Gilded Age. I'll bet you none of that was ever discussed in any review of the Morgan show. Right? However, those
I
issues...
think it was.
Oh, okay, all
one
right.
review in the New York Times review.
Okay, I'm very glad to hear that. I was hoping to be wrong, so I'm wrong again. But
Molly Crabapple.
Good.
She brought it up.
Referenced J.P. Morgan and his wealth. Yeah. Okay. Good. But that's unusual. Was that a review or was it an article?
It was a review.
Okay. Wow. All of my points are being. Okay. With that, I just want to say one other thing because I think we have only 37 seconds left, which is that. Let me just turn this off before it rings. I just want to thank the organizers and also say, oh, I have 5 minutes, really? Oh my goodness. Okay, we'll keep it going.
Okay.
I'm going to do the thank, because I was just thinking about how to thank people. But also, to thank the organizers, but also to say that I think that this discussion was a little bit mistitled, transforming public art. But I think the title should have been something about transforming, oh my goodness, public art from the perspective of women, feminism, the female body, the female creative. So that was a leitmotif in everything that was, all the discussions that have happened today. So anyway, something, even though we have 5 minutes, do you want to say something final? Or should we just wrap it up and give people 5 minutes? Because I had my own timer here. Do you have anything final to say?
No, I think it'll be great to hear from people and have any questions that they may have.
But I think we're not doing questions.
Oh, okay.
On this part. Am I right about that? Yeah. Okay, let's do one question. 1 or 2 questions. Let's do it. All right, do people have questions for Shahzia? Come to the mic if you can. Or can... Yeah, we hear you. We hear you, yes.
So, as this is kind of all within the conversation of monument, and it's very clearly a monument that you're dealing with, have you, and a lot of your work in the past has been monumental, but have you found monument to be a part of your discourse in your previous work, and as well do you see yourself kind of putting forth more monument kind of work in the future?
So, how I think of, say, since you're bringing the term monument into play, much of my work is literally like a notebook page drawing. And so when I think of space, I am not restricted by scale. So even in terms of creating the sculpture, I made all the drawings, they were small drawings, and they were back and forth. Even if I took the drawings and made small maquettes, the maquettes were 20 inches. Everything was resolved in a space where I feel incredibly confident. Like once it's resolved there, it can go as large. And I think that's also because I've done video for 20 years, and I was really interested in the magnification of detail that sometimes is not visible to the naked eye either. And I have to trust that that magnification exists, because it's the kind of nano detail that I am interested in, which is not like a decorative detail, but the idea of the DNA in the work. So in that way, I can think and entertain the term monumental, but as I said, again, the work is incredibly, the works were for a short period of time, and they were not meant to be there. As most of the public art projects that you have also worked with other artists, it's like they are there for a longer period of time. So mine were not.
I will say also that, having been up on the roof, there's a difference between size and scale, right? This is kind of the scale of it. It looks so monumental. And I don't know.
It's 8 feet.
It's not that big. It's really surprisingly small. Because I felt like when I got up there, I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to be like 30 feet tall or something. Maybe not that. Any case, okay, maybe one more question. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks for such a substantive, thoughtful presentation. My question is sort of, can you clarify and flesh out your definition of the feminine?
The feminine? I
The
think
question is, could she flesh out or define the feminine? Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, the feminine is a space that is generative, perhaps redemptive, maybe counter to the very extractive symbols of extraction, capitalist extractive spaces. So maybe I think of the feminine as a counter to that, and maybe I'm inspired, by female poets and writers and thinkers and authors, but basically it's a generative space. So it's a very open, fluid space.
Are we finished, or we have time for one more question? One more, yes.
Shahzia, can you tell everybody about where Witness is going next, where a different location, and maybe speculate about how the audience it will attract there in a place where you already have a work of public art also?
So the Witness is going to go to the University of Houston, and it'll be on their campus, and it's there just for from October of this year till summer. So they participated in helping in the creation of the work. So that's one of the reasons why it's headed there. And also, I have like a connection to Houston. I lived there. I have the work that you're referencing is I have like a piece that I created, which is a fountain, which is in one of the Midtown parks. It engages with the representation of the various representations of Miriam and Mariam and Mary and Magdalene, and like this iteration of the feminine. And it's a face that emerges out of the water. You see it up close. It's very abstract, but if you happen to see it from a building next door, then you see the face. So that is one public art project that I have there, but it's going to go there for a temporary, for about a year. And that answers your question.
That's a hard stop. Okay, I want to thank, hold on, whoa. The organizers are amazing. I want to thank Truth, specifically call her out. And just say to everybody, what a pleasure it has been, of course, to talk to Shahzia, the brilliant Shahzia Sikander, and thank everybody for coming.
Good morning. I'm Jonathan Kuhn, Director of Art and Antiquities for the New York City Parks Department. I want to thank the Conservancy also for convening today's symposium and also for your care 365 days of the year for this magical creative garden known as Madison Square Park. Thanks to Brooke, Truth, Holly, Tom Reedy, and anybody else I left out, and where art and nature mingle and coexist beautifully. Our oldest sculpture is the George Washington in Union Square Park, the oldest work of public art. It was dedicated on July 4th, 1856. And the very next day, the New York Herald reported, "It is, we hope, the commencement of good work of beautifying our great metropolis, the people of which are fond of art and willing to encourage it." I'm grateful to our next speaker, Karen Lemmy, for sharing that prescient commentary that she discovered while working on her doctoral dissertation on the sculptor of that statue, Henry Kirk Brown. And while she was immersed in her graduate studies, she happened to share an office with me for 6 years as the New York City Parks Monuments Coordinator. We also doubled up, by the way, for 2 years of that tenure on all public art projects in New York City. We were the staff, the two of us, for 2,300 parks. So it's my pleasure to present Karen today. Just a few things, probably also in your program. Karen is currently the Lucy S. Rame Curator of Sculpture at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, which holds the largest collection of American sculpture in the world. She's got both parts of the brain working at all times, and her wide-ranging research interests include public art and monuments, the history of materials and methods, American artist colonies in 19th century Italy, the construction of race in American sculpture, the history of sculpture conservation and direct carving. And she's curated exhibitions on artists as varied as Martin Puryear, Isabel Noguchi, and Hiram Powers. Please welcome and encourage Karen Lemmy.
Thank you, Jonathan. Can you all hear me? After such a free-flowing conversation with artists, and I know an accordion is next, I'm reading, and bear with me. I also want to thank, of course, Brooke, Truth, the Madison Square Park Conservancy for the work you do, especially this symposium, which is a highlight for me every year, and the Parks Department for my early training, but also its workers who maintain our city's parks and its sculptures. And of course, to all the artists who help us see history and each other anew. The monuments in Madison Square Park present a microhistory encapsulating some of the key elements in the broader history of American sculpture. But they're ghosts in a way, historical vestiges that haunt an urban space very much alive with 60,000 people passing through daily. These inherited cultural objects may not resonate with the concerns of modern life. They honor subjects whose names may be only vaguely familiar, and few of us can recall the highs and lows of their public lives without Wikipedia. Worth, Conkling, Arthur, Seward, Farragut. As a sculpture historian, those ghosts interest me as a record of how public art has physically changed over time, as well as what the past deemed worthy of commemoration permanently. Looking at this history helps me understand how Shahzia Sikander's sculptures on the roof of the courthouse and on the lawn distinctly depart from what preceded them in the park's long engagement with public art. But indulge me a moment with those ghosts. Among the earliest, perhaps the most cryptic to us, is General Worth's obelisk. It's one of the oldest major monuments, and it hails from 1857, a time when a monument was expected to mark life in a very specific way, and it counted more if it included the mortal remains of the subject it commemorated. So the old general's bones were exhumed from Greenwood Cemetery and are actually still in the middle of Broadway under that obelisk, the reliquary legitimizing the monument. We may feel no more compelled to incorporate human remains in public monuments than we feel moved to heroicize General Worth, a colonel in the Seminole Wars, a major general in the Mexican-American War, both campaigns in the name of expanding the U.S., which led to further genocides, displacements, and later established the Rio Grande as the latter establishing the Rio Grande as the southern border of the U.S., a place that is contested and policed to this day. Among the other monumental ghosts are three rather traditional bronzes. Ward's 1893 portrait of Congressman and Senator Roscoe Conkling, who died after suffering a whiteout blizzard in Union Square Park in 1888. George Bissell's 1899 mutton-chopped president, Chester Alan Arthur, and Randolph Rogers' 1876 portrait of the senator, New York governor, and Lincoln Secretary of War, William Seward, which possibly was the least well-received. One period journalist ridiculed Seward, looking as if he sat in a chair and has an ink spot on the chair and, quote, carefully lifted his right leg to keep from inking his trousers. The breakaway is the Farragut Memorial of 1881, shown here at its original site along Fifth Avenue. And it was the first collaboration on public monuments of architect Stanford White and sculptor Augustus St. Gaudens. In its day, it was called the epic marker, and the Times even said, "We can never afford to put up public statues hereafter which are inferior to Farragut." It's debatable what came after. St. Gaudens Farragut was celebrated for its naturalism as America's answer to Donatello's David. On the upper stage, the wind blows back Farragut's military coat as though he were on the bow of a ship, proclaiming, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead," maybe about to climb into the rigging on his battleship in Mobile Bay, immersing himself in the action instead of staying safe on the bridge. But the exedra below, while enveloping us with allegorical reliefs of fame and courage, blends with contemporary life, hosting our ever-changing city dwellers eating lunch or sitting in the sun. And across from the park, there are many more figurative sculptures in marble on the New York State Appellate Courthouse, which dates to 1900, and that attic level, as we've heard, included 10 sculptures, each one symbolizing a distinct legal system. It's here that we find Shahzia Sikander's sculpture, which she described as, quote, "a fierce woman and a form of resistance in a space that has historically been dominated by patriarchal representation." All of the sculptures, besides Sikander's, were made by white men, most of them heroicized white men, with the exception of these courthouse figures, some of which very problematically essentialize civilizations into a racialized historical figure. The monuments I've shown illustrate takeaways from the Monument Lab's insightful 2021 National Monument Audit, which Brooke mentioned at the beginning of the day, and defined monuments as, quote, "a statement of power and presence in public," after analyzing 48,000 records, affirming the monument landscape is overwhelmingly white and male. And in the current reassessment of public sculpture that's happening nationally and locally, municipalities and communities all over are considering this exclusionary nature of this landscape. Who is representing whom, to what end, in this powerful, visceral art form that can cast us in its shadow, prompt us to feel inspired, revulsed, or maybe even terrorized. We are accustomed to fervent discussion around monuments, but it's important to understand how American sculpture more broadly has been at the nexus of power, especially how it's been a formidable tool in the societal constructions of race. And this is the subject of the exhibition at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, scheduled to open in Washington, a quiet time of November 2024. I want to give a shout out to my dear colleague, Grace Yasamura, who is here today, as well as to the Luce Foundation, the Terra Foundation, and the Lunder Foundation for their early and critical support of this exhibition. Hardly comprehensive, it gathers some 80 sculptures made in a wide range of medium between 1840 and the present by nearly 6 artists whose work variously reinforced racist tropes and classifications or challenged them. Over the last 2 centuries, sculpture in the US has given physical form to racist hierarchies, shaping how generations have visualized race. Racialized figures appear early on, such as this Dying Tecumseh by Ferdinand Petrick, the trope of the dying romanticized so-called noble savage, reinforcing an idea of indigeneity as a monolithic racialized category that functioned as a strategy of disempowerment. In actuality, the Shawnee military leader, who did die in battle in 1813, was a formidable challenge to the United States, having built an alliance of disparate indigenous nations who made common cause in defending their land. Petrick's version in marble stood in the U.S. Capitol between 1864 and 1878 as congressional reps passed it on their way to chamber to vote on legislation to displace Native Americans and decimate their nations. What effect might a sculpture like this have had in the seat of power? A more quotidian example is the so-called Indian head nickel, circulating through millions of palms between 1913 and 1938, insinuating the stereotyped head into mundane purchases like a loaf of bread or a pocket full of candy. As did Tecumseh, it played a role in statecraft as an official representation of the federal government. Science museums, such as Chicago's Field Museum and Field Museum of Natural History, commissioned Malvina Hoffman to sculpt over 100 bronzes in a mistaken attempt to document, quote, the races of mankind. The series had even wider circulation in bronze reductions like this one of the Solomon Islander climbing a palm tree that were sold to collectors and proliferated in illustrations on the borders of Hammond's maps carried into schoolrooms and libraries worldwide. And against these various examples of racist othering, which at the core were about the construction of whiteness and asserting its supremacy, scores of figures in white marble relentlessly anchored an array of virtues and allegories to idealized white bodies, such as Hiram Powers' faith, hope, and charity. I'm showing you hope here, or even America itself, which was intended for the US Capitol. Remarkably, is it heavy yet? Remarkably, the same art form has also been a vital means through which artists have contested and refuted racist ideas and forms of the past. And here on the left, in fact, is the George Washington that Jonathan mentioned. Some sculptors have been perceptive and expressive cultural critics, creating works that appropriate historical tropes in order to deconstruct them. And I'm showing you Titus Kafar's reprise of Brown's 1856 George Washington, Union Square. Kafar began with a three-dimensional scan of a small early model that he then enlarged and rendered as a hollow recess in charred wood. I always think the pyrotechnics of this facture remind us of the violence surrounding some monuments in recent times, as well as the violence of Washington as an enslaver. It also poses the notion of a productive iconoclasm, one in which problematic objects are not merely disappeared, but rather deposed from soaring pedestals, defanged and dissected carefully through the work of contemporary artists. Kafar pulls Washington apart into these scattered glass forms that are as fragile as the racist classifications and hierarchies that empowered the plantation owner to enslave African Americans and wage genocidal military campaigns against Native Americans. Historically, and I really appreciated the conversation this morning. Thank you, Sheila, for helping us define the history of sculpture. The very definition of sculpture has been exclusionary, narrowly focused on bronze and stone. By contrast, many of the contemporary artists on the checklist are working with fiber, found objects, and these two examples in clay, I highlight Virgil Ortiz's pot made with Cochite Puebla coil, glaze, and firing techniques, paying homage not only to the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, but visualizing a future liberation in 2180. And Jiha Moon's comical mashup of racist labels in tiger banana, blending mottled banana peels, tigers, and breast-like peaches, a fruit thought to be indigenous to China, but also the state fruit of Georgia, where she lives and teaches, calling out the tendency to over-sexualize Asian women, Jiha Moon's polyvalent references disrupt viewers' presumptions, and as she says of her work, quote, well, it might look Asian, but it's all about America. Contemporary sculptures cannot mitigate the damaging effects of the past, nor can they temper, mediate, or reconcile racist historical images, but they can offer new conceptual approaches. As Shahzia has stated, if we use art, media, and culture to reverse stereotypes about gender, race, immigrants, and the unfamiliar, the beliefs we pass on to future generations will reflect the complex and dynamic world we live in. Allow me one more ghost. When I learned that Witness was 18 feet tall, my mind conjured this ghost of the once celebrated and now vanished Diana of Madison Square Garden Tower, 1891, another collaboration between St. Gaudens and Stanford White. Better known by the second version, a 13-foot tall example that was salvaged when the tower was demolished in 1925, now in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. That first version of Diana was also 18 feet tall, gilded, and carrying a billowing swath of metal drapery that echoes the swirling forms in Witness. Diana proved too cumbersome to function as a weather vane as intended, but it was a spectacular pinnacle lighting up the city's skyline, among the first buildings to do this. It was also the sculptor's only nude figure, and however skillfully rendered, it is yet another objectification of the nude female body. And I have to say, the womanizing reputation of both architect and sculptor did give me pause. As a Greco-Roman mythical figure, Diana could hardly be asked to give consent, and yet she is so often depicted unrobed, even though we know from the Greek myth that she guarded her privacy from the male gaze. Remember what happened to Actaeon. Like Diana, Sikander's Witness is gold-toned, athletic, powerful, and 18 feet tall, but it draws on distinctively different sources from that Greco-Roman and French Beaux-Arts tradition and offers an empowering, self-sufficient vision of womanhood. Written on her skirt in polychromatic mosaic, as we've heard, is the Urdu word Havah, meaning air, atmosphere, as well as Eve in several languages. And she wears that jabot, inspired by the sartorial choices of Justice Ginsburg. I once heard Shahzia say the jabot has the effect of dressing that figure, as if she were wearing a bodysuit, or maybe in my mind, a superhero's protective garment that is complemented by her ram horn-shaped hair, symbols of strength. In the hands of the Conservancy, the park is a sculptural palimpsest, each year bringing contemporary works by contemporary artists who, like the artists on the checklist for the shape of power, help us see sculpture anew. Havah has energized the park, and as it moves on, I recall Shahzia saying this female form, quote, can carry its roots wherever it goes. Not embedded in the land, Witness is ready to take flight, and I'm excited to see it provoke thought and wonder elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen Lemmy, for that insightful presentation. Gregorio Uribe, who we will hear from in a few moments, is a singer, accordionist, and big band leader known for work that blends cumbia, a foundational genre of Latin folk music, with other Colombian rhythms. Known for its distinctive 2/4 meter, cumbia with its polyrhythms and reliance on a wide variety of drums is believed to have originated in Africa. The genre traveled to the northern coast of Colombia, a result of forced migration of enslaved peoples, where indigenous communities introduced wind instruments such as the gaita. When the accordion arrived in Colombia from Europe in the mid-19th century, it quickly became a staple of cumbia as the instrument was portable and quite loud. As cumbia traveled from the coast to Colombia's urban interior and later through all of Latin America, the accordion remained a defining feature of the genre, often taking center stage. As cumbia continues to evolve today, its distinctive rhythm can be heard in songs by Selena, Bad Bunny, Shakira, and even in EDM. It is an honor to close this year's annual symposium on public art with an accordion performance of a genre that has and continues to blend the rhythms, instruments, and stories of publics from all across the globe. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Gregorio Uribe, a musician who has performed for audiences in great international music halls to the subways of New York City.
Dulce cáliz de los abutilones, chícala con acordes de trompeta, el bencenuco con su arma secreta, veneno tras fragancia de limones. Aquel yarumo ha visto 100 ladrones, y aunque canoso anda en bicicleta, el abejorro con su malva alcahueta, y una asteracia vale 1000 perdones. En la mañana un té de hierbabuena huele a rocío y a panadería. La bugambilia con su Cartagena, sobre el Kikuyo cae su geografía. Para sus 100 se hizo la cayena, para su cuerpo el manto de María. Y en esta ciudad de lluvia, usted es la primavera, y en esta ciudad de lluvia, usted es la primavera. Bajo la sombra de los agregados camina nuestro amor con su retoño, y cada tarde comienza el otoño mientras paseamos como jubilados los huracanes sobre los tejados. Y aunque en botánica seré bisoño, del 7 cueros te regalo un moño mientras paseamos como jubilados, y el chachafruto carga en su envoltura un porotito como el de su vientre, su mismo rojo de literatura. Usted me dijo que donde me encuentre, la pasión en reposo es la ternura. Amor, no deje que me desconcentre. Y en esta ciudad de lluvia, usted es la primavera, y en esta ciudad de lluvia, usted es la primavera, y en esta ciudad de lluvia, usted es la primavera, y en esta ciudad de lluvia, usted es la primavera.
Gracias. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's pretty nerve-wracking to play after this amazing, talented artists, the intellectuals and everything. I've been like, my heart rate just been between excited and intimidated, but overall excited. So thank you for having me here. Thank you, Truth, for that introduction. So I am from Colombia, and cumbia is one of my favorite rhythms. Born in the Caribbean coast of Colombia, but spread out throughout Latin America. You go to any kitchen, any deli in New York, you're gonna hear some cumbia. But that song is the one that I just played is a little different. And I decided to play it because it's a song that I wrote for the flowers and the trees of my neighborhood in Bogota. A beautiful name of the neighborhood, La Soledad, the solitude, no? How poetic already. And I just fell in love with that space, and I think it was relevant to play here because obviously with Madison Square Park and all of these spaces, they're havens when you're in a city like this, right? A place to go breathe, to write for whatever it is. Even before the event started today, there's a little park here on 24th, I think, because I wanted to do a little warm-up. And it's a tiny little park, but that just changed my day. And this song, so I wrote it for the flowers, but I also wrote it for my wife. And I wrote it originally in a vallenato rhythm, also from Colombia, but my wife is from Argentina, just like Ana Maria. So I decided to change it into a tango, and that's why it sounds a little different. I got two accordions because I think this one goes better with the color of my eyes. So this, and I actually decided on the spot to play this other song a few summers ago, and I like to emphasize summer because usually in the summertime everywhere is a little more joyous, but I had a little bit of an existential crisis here in New York in the summer. And just as you maybe have a headache, you maybe go to the pharmacy and you get an Advil or something, I felt, okay, so when it's more like a pain of the soul, where do you go? So my instinct was to go to a bookstore. And that's where I started, looking a little more in depth and started sort of flirting with the works of Camus and Kierkegaard and all these existentialists. And I found empathy in those. And it's interesting because I love that phrase of write about what you know. And although I love cumbia, which is born in the riversides and the towns by fishermen and farmers, and I honor that, and I've been able to meet and collaborate with many of them, my story and my reality has been different in the city, in the bookstores, all these things. So I decided to combine in my latest album these works of existentialism with cumbia rhythm. So if you like ideas and you like talking, you also like to shake your hips and your butt, that's what you do. So this one is called Atlas, and it's based on that famous phrase of God is dead. And the idea is, I don't know what to do with that. If that's a reality, how to navigate that? How do you continue? How do you carry the heavens when you don't have a floor? So more than certainties, it's questions and doubts, and this is called Atlas. Caminando en el desierto, hallé un pastor de rodillas. Sus manos llenas de arcilla me preguntaban con miedo: dime, ya que Dios ha muerto, ¿quién lo debe reemplazar? Dime, ya que Dios ha muerto, ¿quién lo debe reemplazar? Seguido encontré un mendigo rodando por una duna. Me hablaba su tez moruna, camino inerte al abismo. ¿Cómo se cargan los cielos si no hay suelo que pisar? ¿Cómo se cargan los cielos si no hay suelo que pisar?
Seguido encontré los gritos que pregonaba un caudillo. Con su dogma y su cuchillo le predicaba a su gente. El precio de la utopía con sangre se pagará. El precio de la utopía con sangre se pagará. Caminé sobre 1000 letras y al fin llegué a las palmeras. Regaba ella sus materas y con un beso me dijo: ¿quién es dueño de su vida? De su muerte lo será. ¿Quién es dueño de su vida? De su muerte lo será. ¿Quién es dueño de su vida? De su muerte lo será. ¿Quién es dueño de su vida y de su muerte lo será? All right. Time goes so fast on stage. I mean, I'm sure the speakers can identify with that. Again, well, thank you. I have one more song. Is that okay? Can I do one more? Very good. All right. I know you've been such a wonderful crowd. And this song is we have we have a strange way in Colombia to call like your soulmate. It's media naranja. You're half orange. You're my half orange. Hey, it's just colorful. I love it. I love it. So that's the title of this song. But it actually talks about how, I guess, relationships really come down, romantic relationships really come down to the individual, and how it's an opportunity for everybody to kind of make their own recipe, decide their own relationship, see what works, whatever works for you, for the two people, or whoever, however many are involved. So it's a little bit playful, and it's very much inspired on just spending so much time in New York and feeling that that sort of adventurous and originality of the spirit of the people here, and trying to look again for their own voices. So in this song, Romeo and Juliet don't commit suicide. Adam and Eve get divorced. Orpheus is in a polyamorous relationship, and all of that. So this is Media Naranja. It's been an honor and a privilege. Thank you so much to this wonderful organization for having me. Really, it's a privilege. Brooke, Truth, and everybody that is involved with all the logistics, as well as the speakers. I know Sheila has a special place in her heart for the accordion, so we can definitely relate with that. And I leave this place very inspired. Así que muchas gracias. If I can, if you want to hear cumbia with the whole setup, dancing, all that, I'm playing tonight at Drum here in the village, so come by and shake your hips. And this is Media Naranja. Se siente un viento de cambio, se reinventa la poesía. Julieta hace un doctorado, Romeo no se suicida, y el príncipe y la princesa se la pasan de pelea, ya que el amante chipriota lo traicionó Galatea. Eva ya no utiliza su apellido de casada. Adán plancha sus camisas, pero aún brillan sus miradas, mientras se burlan los orillas de las falsas monogamias. Dicen que Bacho y Bochica se la pasan en terapia. Yo quiero que tú acompañes mi preciada soledad. Yo quiero que tú acompañes mi preciada soledad. Prometo cuidar la tuya y ofrecerte mi verdad. Prometo cuidar la tuya y ofrecerte mi verdad. Dulcinea tiene un novio que conoció en internet. Hoy viven en concubinato, igual que María y José. Tristan ya salió del closet y vive en Miami Beach. Orfeo volvió a casarse, esta vez por lo civil. Se escasean las mitades, se ahoga la hipocresía. Quedan dos cuerpos enteros, queda tu risa y la mía. No soy tu media naranja, tú no eres mi solución. No quiero tu dependencia, pero me encanta tu olor. ¡Oba! Yo quiero que tú acompañes mi preciada soledad. Yo quiero que tú acompañes mi preciada soledad. Prometo cuidar la tuya y ofrecerte mi verdad. Prometo cuidar la tuya y ofrecerte mi verdad. Yo quiero que cada mañana te preguntes nuevamente si quieres seguir presente, si aún se te da la gana. Quedarte otra semana sin papeles ni escrituras, sin anillos ni ataduras. Pues solo así voy a saber que es verdadero tu querer, tu sonrisa y tu ternura. ¡Vamos! Yo quiero que tú acompañes mi preciada soledad. Yo quiero que tú acompañes mi preciada soledad. Prometo cuidar la tuya y ofrecerte mi verdad. Prometo cuidar la tuya y ofrecerte mi verdad. 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 Gracias.
That is the best way to end a symposium. All of us, thank you, Gregorio. That was rousing and thrilling. All of us at Madison Square Park Conservancy are so grateful to the minds who spoke and participated today powerfully about their work and the implications of personal and creative transformation to advance their ideas. Thank you, Zenobia Bailey, Zoe Buckman, Tom Finkelpearl, Jenny Goldstein, Ana Maria Hernando, Karen Lemmy, Sheila Pepe, Legacy Russell, Shahzia, Sikander, Gregorio, Gilbert Vicario, and thank you to all our neighbors and communities who joined us today. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.